Welcome everyone to Punch Needle 2.0, Beyond the Basics. We will begin at the top of the hour. Welcome everyone. We are waiting for a few more people to sign in. We've discovered that sometimes Zoom slows down a bit as people are logging on. We'll begin at 1 minute past the hour. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Deborah Smith, editor of Rug Hooking Magazine, the host of this webinar, and we are so very pleased to have you joining us today for Punch Needle 2.0, Beyond the Basics with Punch Needle Rug Hooking, and the star of the show, Rebecca Martin. Before we begin, I invite you to visit our website, rughookingmagazine.com, to see what we have to offer. We have our print magazine, chock full of wonderful rugs and articles by some of the best rug hookers in the world. We have a free newsletter. Be sure to sign up for that. And we have a book club to share our newest books hot off the press. We would love to welcome you into the rug hooking community. First, let's talk about a few housekeeping issues. If you get disconnected, you can reconnect using the same link. You will not be interrupting the talk. We are recording today's webinar, so if you have technical difficulties, don't worry. We'll send you a link and you can watch it later. And it will be posted on the RHM website very soon. This event will last about 1 hour. If you need to leave before we are done, be sure to check your email later for the link so that you can watch the entire event. We have enabled the Q&A feature, so if you have a question for Rebecca, send it through Q&A, and if there's time, we'll have her answer them at the end. Now, excuse me, now to the fun part. Excuse me, technical glitch. Do you like wool? Of course you do. And we know you like punch needles. So as a special treat today, we have a giveaway. Thanks to the generosity of Rebecca Martin and Amy Oxford, we are giving away a wool pack of Storyteller wool and a complete set of Oxford punches. To be eligible to win, post a photo of your punch needle project with the hashtag you see on the screen. One of you will win this great combo of wool and punches. Good luck. So now, happy International Punch Needle Rug Hooking Day, everyone. Every year in April, we take time to celebrate our sister textile art, punch needle. It's great to see so many people picking up a punch and trying it out. And I love that it's appealing to lots of young people who seem to be drawn to the art form. Thank you all for coming today to hear an expert talk about punch needle rug hooking. And finally, what you've all been waiting for, it's my great pleasure to introduce you again to Rebecca Martin, our punch needle expert for the day. She lives and teaches in Northern Colorado. In fact, she is a certified punch needle rug hooking instructor and is in the process of obtaining her McGowan certification in traditional rug hooking. Drawn to the fiber arts since she was young, she has a background in needlepoint and quilting. She is also a whiz in the dye pots, creating lovely wool for her company, Storyteller Wool. She designs patterns, punch needle kits, and works on her own fiber art, which she generously shares with RHM. Rebecca is a frequent contributor to Rug Hooking Magazine. In fact, her work has even been on the cover. And we're always pleased to have her creative designs in our pages. The piece shown here, the one Rebecca will be talking about, is in the March, April, May issue of RHM. Hello, Rebecca. It's great to have you here.
Hi, it's great to be here. So I wanted to thank Deb for that great introduction and thank Rug Hooking Magazine for hosting this webinar. So I've really enjoyed being the ambassador for International Punch Needle Rug Hooking Day for these past 2 years. So last year we had the Hope pattern, which was this crocus. And this year we have the Shine pattern. And today's class is going to be in 3 parts. So we're going to start with a review of tools and techniques. And I know if anyone was on the call last year that some of this may be a review, but it's always the best way to start is going over all of our punch needles and foundation fabrics. Then we're going to go over the pattern of the International Punch Needle Day pattern for this year. And then we will wrap up with a discussion on different ways to display all of these 8x8 pieces we've been making over the years, as well as other small fiber art pieces. So now we're going to switch the camera to my hands and we're going to get started looking at the pattern. So now if you haven't downloaded your pattern yet, you can go to storytellerwool.com and there is a free download and you'll get a paper pattern as well as all the directions needed. So feel free to go and download that after the call if you haven't downloaded it already. So when we start a project, we start with a paper pattern usually. And the next question is, how are we going to get it on our foundation cloth? What are we going to do with it? Are we going to hook it? Are we going to punch it? If we're punching it, what needles are we going to use? So when I look at a design, I decide, is it more suited for a regular needle or a fine needle? So we're going to go over the different needles and why you pick one for another. So with this pattern, I chose to punch it with the fine needle, the number 13 and the 14 Oxford needle, which are the smallest of the Oxford needles. You can punch it with a regular needle, and the piece, when punched with a regular needle, looks like this. So it loses a little bit of its definition, but it can definitely be punched with a regular needle. I felt though that it looked better with the fine needle. So let's take a look at our needles. So with Oxford needles, you have 8 to choose from. And I keep mine kind of separated. So we've got our 8, 9, and 10 in both a regular and a fine. And then we have our 13 and our 14 that are only available in the fine. And a question that a lot of people ask is, all right, what's the difference between regular and fine? Does fine mean I'm using it for fine work? And it can mean that, but the main difference is the yarn we're using. So a regular needle, you're going to use a bulky weight yarn or something of that thickness. And that goes in our regular needle. You can see the regular needle has a thicker metal needle part than the fine needle. Now with a fine needle, you would use a finer yarn. So worsted weight, heavy worsted weight, you can double up sock yarn. Your thinner yarns go in your fine needles. You can take apart a rug yarn and put it in your fine needles. You can double up a fine yarn and put it in your regular needles. So then the numbers dictate size. and it goes in the opposite of what you would think. So the higher the number, our 13 or 14, make our smallest loop. And so then we start going down to our 8, which actually makes our tallest loop. Now, a lot of people will often ask the question about why my needles are so dark compared to the maple needles that you may have. These are cherry, so your needle will not darken to this color. These are just a needle that was offered a few years ago, and that's why my needles are darker than yours. So I wanted to show you now, I'll pull that back down, our different heights. So I chose to use the 13 and the 14 for my piece. So they make these tiny little baby loops, and I just love the 13 and the 14. These tiny loops really allow us to get a lot of detail. Now, you can use your 10, 9, and 8 fine with your thinner yarn, and you can achieve increased detail with it. But I find the main way to do that, you have to really snuggle it up, because as you can see, my 10 fine punched with worsted weight yarn, and then my 10 regular punched with rug yarn. Actually, let's look at the green one. We can see it a little bit better. See how they're just as puffy? And that's because of the height. So at 3/8 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, that puff of yarn on the loop side likes to bloom out. And that's why we can't get that, that level of detail that we can often get with the 13 and the 14, because it's not coming up as high, so it doesn't bloom as much. I do use my fine needles though in larger pieces. I just did a piece that had a ship, and for the rigging of the ship, I used my 10 fine. And then I made sure to punch my 10 regular really close up against it. And that allowed me to really sort of smush it and get a fine line. So just the main takeaway, fine is our thin yarn, our regular needles is our thicker yarn. And then if we really want fine detail, the 13 and the 14 are the way to go. But you can get your fine needles to give you more detail if you really try to smush your loops with other loops. You can get a finer detail. So let's see if I can switch this for the camera so you can see it a little bit better. How we have, it's just so low to the foundation cloth, and then we get progressively higher to a 1/2 inch loop. And it's a lot of fun to combine the needles. I like to combine especially my 10 and my 8 together. The 8 will be for a detail, and then I'll use the 10 for the background, so it's recessed. And even though the 13 and the 14 are close in size to each other, I will use my 13 for details and the 14 for my background, so it's a little recessed. And that's what I did with the shine pattern this year. So that's our needles. So with this pattern, I've decided I'm going to be using my fine needles, and I'm going to especially be using the 13 and the 14. So our next question is our foundation cloth. Now, I know a lot of people on the call are probably traditional rug hookers as well, and we all love our primitive linen. This is a unbleached linen. There's also bleached linen. You can punch into linen. I think it punches beautifully. In fact, it's really great for beginners because the holes are a little more spread apart than monk's cloth. So you could transfer your pattern to linen. You can transfer it to rug warp. I do enjoy punching into rug warp, but mainly with the fine needles. I find the regular needles, I get a little bit of hand strain when I'm using a regular needle into rug warp, but rug warp is a nice powerhouse fabric to use. And then a less common fabric, but it'll still work, is we can actually punch straight into wool fabric. Again, the fine needles punch better into wool fabric than the regular needles because they're a little bit thicker and will create a hole. So I like punching into wool, but that wouldn't necessarily work as well for this project. The main go-to fabric we have is our monk's cloth. Now, monk's cloth is a cotton cloth. It's 2 threads over 2 threads with about 12 holes per inch, and it often has these 2-inch guidelines. This is door mill monk's cloth. It's my favorite to use. I think it's the really one of the highest quality out there. There is another monk's cloth that has white lines running in both directions, which is really handy when you're drawing out a pattern. That's sold by Searsport down in Florida, and that's a really nice cloth as well. You will, with the increased popularity of punch needle rug hooking, we are seeing monk's cloth that's coming onto Amazon, and it looks a lot like this one, but in person it's similar, but it's very rough. I don't find it doesn't stretch as nicely onto frames. But it is nice to see. I mean, when you start seeing stuff show up on Amazon, it means things are getting popular. So that is nice to see, but it is not, it's not as good as the door. I really like the door. Now, the one downside to our foundation cloths is that they aren't readily available. You can't just walk into Joann's or Michael's or even Walmart and find it. You can walk in and find this. And unfortunately, this has the same name. This is called monk's cloth. So many an excited puncher is in the store, sees the word monk's cloth, it rings a bell, and they buy a few yards. They're so excited. They rush home thinking, what a deal compared to the price of the monk's cloth I'm seeing online. This is a different cloth. This is 4 threads over 4 threads, and it's about 6 holes per inch. It was not designed for rug hooking or punch needle rug hooking. I've heard different takes on what it was designed for, but I've heard Swedish embroidery and other things. It's a nice cloth. It's pretty. It's white. It has holes. It's got the same name, but it is not the same cloth. Now, I do know people who have taken this cloth, washed it and dried it and punched into it and had reasonable success with it. So that's one thing to know. And another thing I always like to stress and stress highly is the most important thing you can do is to create fiber art. If this is the only cloth you have, or you went and bought a ton of it and want to use it up, by all means, use it. Just know that the experience you're having with this isn't as good as the experience you'll have with the cloth that was designed for our craft. But I think it is always best to make something than to not make something. And you could also use this cloth with kids, or if you're teaching someone. So I suppose it has its place, but just don't be confused that it was not designed for our craft. Another another foundation cloth you can use is burlap, and you can punch into that. It's very rough on the hands, and when you split one of the fibers on burlap, you're done. Where this can really take a beating. But again, burlap is much easier to get a hold of, and it's quite affordable. So know that burlap is an option, but it can be a temperamental one. I've just recently been experimenting with both hooking and punching on some recycled or coffee bags, so which is a form of burlap. And that's a unique experience, and it's working, but it's not like my powerhouse of monk's cloth. So for my pattern, I want to use monk's cloth. So most of us don't have light tables at home, but we do have a window or a sliding glass door. So you print out your pattern, you tape it to the door. Painter's tape works great, masking tape. Then you tape your cloth over it, and then you trace it. Sharpie is always a great go-to for tracing it. Soft pencil, these are primary school pencils, the fat ones that kindergartners and first graders get. These are great for tracing. Now, if you rub against the pattern a lot as you're working on it, it'll wear off, but for an initial trace, and then you could go over it with your marker. I love using these pencils. And also the pencil is great for when you can't just sort of lay this down. And if I just went around the outside, it's not going to be on the grain of the monk's cloth, and my piece won't be perfectly, or as perfect as one can get with fiber art, square if I just traced around it. You need to make sure you're on the grain. And to do that, I mark my piece, and then what I do is I take the pencil or the pen, I put it in the ditch of the monk's cloth, and with some pressure, I push down in it, and it stays in the grain, and I get a perfectly straight line. I recommend doing this, or checking patterns you buy to make sure that they're on the grain too. It's always a bummer to get going on a pattern and then realize that it's not quite square. It's more noticeable on larger pieces. But so I drag down to create my my square lines, and then I would trace my pattern. Another option for tracing is, these are fun. They're sulky pens. You can get them online and at craft stores. And what you would do if you were using one of these pens is you'd print out your design, and then you trace over it with the pen. And then you lay your cloth on and iron it, and it transfers the design onto your monk's cloth. It will reverse the image. You have to keep that in mind, especially if you were transferring a design that had words on it. So these sulky pens are fun to use. And I know people who have used tulle and other things where they'll trace a pattern and on the tulle and then trace it again. So now we've done our foundation cloth, and now it's time to talk about frames. So your most accessible frame will be an embroidery hoop, and not just any embroidery hoop. You want one that has a bead and a channel. So my recommendation is the Morgan hoop is a brand I like. You can see how it has this channel and then the bead. And that allows, when you put the monk's cloth on, clamp it in and really crank it down, you can get your cloth nice and tight. Nothing is as tight as a gripper frame. Now I already have the pattern on the gripper frame. Oh, and a note, Amy Oxford is having a one-day flash sale on the official International Punch Needle Day, which is this Saturday the 9th, and her frames are amazing. So if you are in the market for a frame, I would check out that sale. And also know that your traditional rug hooking frames can be used for punch needle. It's just you can't flip them and look at your work because our loops are forming on the underside. So a punch needle frame is a flat frame with no base. And we want to stretch our monk's cloth on it. We have this cozy on it because the gripper strips are quite sharp. I'm just going to show you the gripper strips. So there they are. And when we stretch our monk's cloth, we can feel like we've gotten it nice and tight. We want to drop like a drum. And we can pinch and go all around and get it tight. But the best way to get it super tight, Amy taught me, and I'll never forget it because of the way she taught me. She said, all right, you're going to karate chop your frame. And then we've got some kissing ducks. And the kissing ducks, I just never forgot that. So your kissing ducks, grab the cloth, your hands are resting on it. That was the karate chop. And then you're going to give it a nice pull. Do you see the difference there? Do you see how much more I got? It was pretty tight before, but look at what I'm really getting it nice and tight. And then let's make sure that that cozy is back on. Now, if you don't have a cozy, that's fine. Another trick is feel around on the frame, and anywhere where it pokes you, grab your tape again and just put some tape over it. I have a really large frame that I built and I just didn't feel like sewing such a large cozy for it. So I do the tape. And they will get you these little gripper strips. They are sharp. All right, so now this is drawn perfectly straight with a trick I showed you before, but it doesn't look straight right now. So I am gonna, let's just get it a little tighter. All right, and that's where these guidelines really can come in handy too, because they're all 2 inches apart and you can make sure things are drawn the way they need to be. So now I have it nice and tight on my frame and I'm ready to punch. One of the reasons we want it so tight is it's gonna reduce hand strain. As I'm punching down into it, if this had a tremendous amount of bounce to it, you know, that's just more muscle work. So we have it all stretched and ready to go. And so now we would begin punching. So I'm just going to do a quick demonstration of how to thread the needle and how to punch, and also the order in which we punch. Now, if you have a piece that fits within your frame that you're not having to move it, our order is we're going to do any border we have. This piece doesn't have a border. Then you do your details, and then you do your background. So with this piece, there's no border. So I'm going to start with my details, and then I'll punch the background. And I have chosen the 13 and the 14. The 13 we have nicknames. So the 14 we call the mini. And the 13 is just a bit taller. So it's like the mini put on her high heels. So we call this the mini with heels. So the mini with heels, the number 13, another fun thing with cozy is it can kind of hold your needles. The 13 is what I'm going to punch all my details with, and then I'll go back and punch with the 14. So let's go over threading the needle. Now, I like watching videos on YouTube, which I'm sure a lot of you have looked at YouTube videos before, but I do not like watching long videos on YouTube. So I've taken every element that we have here today, threading the needle, stretching the monk's cloth, foundation cloths, all sorts of things like that. And they're short videos. So if you want to just remember how to thread the needle, you can go watch that video and you don't have to sit through a long video. Like this class is being recorded and you will have access to it again. But if you just wanted to look up a technique, you can go into YouTube. My teenage son really wanted me to make sure I tell you about YouTube. I'm not cool enough to have it be like Storyteller Wool attached to YouTube, you have to put in the word YouTube in Google and Storyteller Wool, and then it'll pull me up. But I suppose if I have more followers someday, you could just type the name into the URL. So I have YouTube videos for all this stuff. So threading your needle. The main thing to remember here, I'm going to move this out of the way just so we can focus on the needle. The main thing with our needle is this is the front of your needle where the channel is. Because the needle has, you know, a hole going through both sides, you might be tempted at some point to thread on this side, no channel. The other way to remember too is you can read the Oxford, and then you can think about Amy and Vermont and how these are made here and have wonderful history. And oh, I've got an Oxford needle. This is great. Channel, I can read the Oxford. That's how we know this is the front. Now, all the fine needles have this little eye hook on the end. So what they're called, cup hook, eye hook. So you're going to go up through that first, and that's just to train your finer fibers away from you so they don't get tangled up. Then you're going to go through the eye of the needle, kind of notch it in. I notch it in here. And then I like to pull on this side until it's running freely in the needle. Now, if you put a fiber in here and you go to punch and it falls out, it's too thin a fiber. So try doubling it up. You want it to move freely. I really like this heavy worsted weight. It's an Aran weight yarn. And the reason I like it is it allows me to punch every other hole pretty much. And I don't really have to change how I punch with a fine needle. Traditional worsted weight, you might punch every hole. So I often will do a little sample because all of our thinner yarns will punch differently and see what I like. And that's why we like to flip our frames, because you're going to want to see the holes on the other side, or your loops forming on the other side. So to punch, I'll come back to our, oops, sorry, I hit the camera there, to our pattern. We've got it threaded. And now you're going to hold it like a pen, and your middle finger rests underneath, rests right there. Some people like to have a little pinky out, a little sort of tea party pinky, and to stabilize, and that's fine. I'm not a pinky person though. I keep my pinky tucked. And then the base of my hand sits on the monk's cloth. So I'm going up and down. If I chose to hover and my hand is in the air, that increases the fine motor technique. You're using a lot more muscles if you're hovering. So take advantage of keeping your hand down, and we're just going to pivot up and down. So we're holding it like a pen, slightly more upright than a pen. And the beauty of the punch is we go down and the punch stops you. I can't go any further. It stops me. And then the biggest thing with punching is just coming up, gliding, and going down again. If you come up too far, you're going to pull out your last loop. So you would just snuggle it back up and carry on if you did that. So when we want short tails, always have short tails, because all these are going to get cut off. And if you were working through a kit and you started like this and all these are getting cut off, think about how you might blow through your yarn allotment. So you want to always have short tails. So we got our short tail. Whoops, there we go. And then we're going to go all the way down. You want your fiber running free. That's where this little guide helps. And then as we come up out of the monk's cloth, we're just going to glide across the cloth. Like, think about shuffling across the kitchen floor in your slippers. You're just gliding, and then you're going down again. If you come up too far, you'll pull your last loop out, or it'll be sort of bubbly. Now, we're going to have flat back stitches on this side, and our loops form on the underside. So I have a lot of different videos about punching and the basic punching. It's a little harder to show on camera, but I'm going to attempt it so you can see what's happening. So I'm punching upside down now. So I punch in, up comes the needle, and it's folding the yarn. And there are little loops that are forming. And then on this side, let's see, I was just punching straight through the center of the design. On this side, we have our flat stitches. And one of the beauties of monk's cloth is we can start, stop, take things out, get the grid back in shape, and carry on. Where with a burlap, they might not come back into shape as well, or you might bust through one of the threads. So that's our basics with punching. So I know that was a review for a lot of you. So now let's get on to looking at the pattern and talking about all the fun things we can do with it. So the theme of shine, I thought was just great. So Amy comes up with a theme every year, and some years she has more specifics. Like for Hope, she asked for a flower, and so that's how I came up with the crocus, because that's such a hopeful flower coming out of the snow in the springtime. And for shine, though, there was no real direction, and I knew I wanted to use the fine needle since we had used the regular needle for Hope the year before. And so I came up with this design, and if you read the article in Rug Cooking Magazine, it was sort of a long and circuitous route to some abstract papyrus reeds becoming the theme for this. And I do feel there's something sort of shine about this. So I love using rug yarn, but initially I thought, great, shine. I'm going to go out and get all kinds of novelty fibers. This is going to be a lot of fun. But I guess you can't teach this old dog too many new tricks, because as much as I played with the pattern with novelty fibers, and it's probably because I dye yarn, I kept going back to rug yarn. So this is that heavy worsted. I just love the way it punches, but I knew I wanted a shiny element. So when I was at Sauder Rug Week over the summer, I met Grace Colette, and I look up her name and her work. She is just amazing. She actually was a student in my punch needle class. It was just such a treat to meet her, and 2 of her pieces were in the show. She does a lot of work with sequins, and she really inspired me. And so when I knew it was shine, I thought, well, I'm going to do some sequins like I saw that Grace did. And I've actually never worked with sequins before. So, sequins have little holes in them. And so what I did is first I finished my piece and steamed it, because I did not want to have to steam sequins and beads. And then I sewed on each sequin. So I come up through the sequin hole, put a little bead on it, and then go back down through the same hole. And that locks on each sequin. And I use a really thick thread. I'll show you this thread. I just love this thread. I think the packaging has changed since I bought this, but it's this furrier waxed linen thread, and you pull out strands of it, so there's no spools that are flying off the table. Love this stuff. And it's nice and thick, kind of like a button thread. So just one time through, and then I tie it off on the other side. So I really feel this pattern is ripe for alternative fibers, and we're gonna look at them. But I just couldn't do that. I really wanted to play with sequins. So one thing, and it'll be a little bit of a review from last year as well. When we punch, we tend to punch with yarn, and we punch tighter than we hook. So the piece, when it comes off the frame, is going to have some curl to it. It'll curl up like this when it comes off the frame. And a lot of new punchers, especially if they are traditional rug hookers, will think they've done something wrong that it's curling up. So we want to see a taco. We're in Colorado, we eat a lot of Mexican food. So we want it to have a bit of curl to it. And that means you put enough yarn in it. If it came off your frame and it's, rolled up on itself, kind of like a taquito would be, you have put way too much yarn in it. And you will know, because you'll feel it. Your hand will hurt as you're trying to muscle it in. And also the loops will dome up because you've overwhelmed the grid. So if it becomes really hard to punch, and then you're looking at your loop side and it's kind of bubbling up, that means you're putting too much yarn in it, and you need to back off a bit. Now, if you took it off the frame and it was just limp like this, sort of like a tortilla, then you probably could have put a little more yarn into it, and you would see some gaps. So we want it to be nice and filled, but not overfilled. And now when I use my heavy worsted or Aran weight yarn, I punch it very similar to the way I punch with rug yarn. So I'm punching every other hole, and I'm not leaving any spaces. Now, when I go down to a thinner worsted weight, or if I'm doubling up sock weight, I'll punch in every hole, and then I leave a little breathing room. I might leave some spaces. So, but that's why you can't see any spaces on this. It's just the weight of my yarn and the yarn I like to use. So I steamed my piece, and then I sewed my sequins on. Now, if we wanted to look at some alternative fibers, and alternative just in my universe just means not rug yarn. I created a little sample board for you all to look at. Now I punched this upside down so the loops would be on the top side, just because I thought it'd be easier to see on camera. So the first 3 I punched with my 10 regular. So I used this needle. This is fun. I have 3 thin yarns. I mean, this is quite thin. This is, I would say, is a sock weight, this fuchsia. Then this has some nice sparkle to it. This is more of a worsted weight. And this was a quite soft worsted weight yarn, maybe even actually a touch lighter. I threaded all 3 together in my punch and punched with them. And it was kind of a neat look. Another fun fiber is this fur yarn. Now, it can be temperamental. I have some areas that are a little more compacted and other areas where it puffed out. This is a lot of fun to punch with. I just found I had to slow it down when I punched, but I just really like the effect, and it's not as tricky to punch with as I originally expected when I first started working with this fur yarn. This yarn is sort of the surprise in the punch world. This is what I call Minky yarn, or it would be like a fleece yarn. It's what you would use to crochet a baby blanket. It reminds me of what you might find in a bathroom rug. It's like a fleece. And usually in punch needle, the softer the yarn, the more tricky it is to punch. It likes to flop around. That's why we like our rug yarn. Our rug yarn gives us these nice upright loops. You know, it's not flopping anywhere. It's nice and coarse. And I always say that a good definition of rug yarn is like, oh, that might be a scratchy sweater. Well, you know, it's going to be a great rug then. So the reason we like it is we get these wonderful upright loops. And that allows us to create our designs without them getting locked into each other and tangled. So usually the softer or more luscious knitting yarns will flop over and get tangled. Now this is super soft, but I think because of its density, it punches really well. So this is a great one to use if you're punching with children, because it's a very economical yarn. It's soft, it's fun, it comes in fun colors. So doesn't necessarily shine, but it's just too fun a yarn to not talk about. Now, the other 3 I punched with my 10 fine. Now, usually we would say, don't try to punch with eyelash yarn. And this is, or any kind of hairy yarn, you're not going to be happy. And I think that's a very good rule. But I also think, try it. You just never know. Every yarn's a little bit different, especially if you already have it in your stash. This yarn actually punched quite easily. I've doubled it up in my regular needle before. I mean, it's an interesting look. So yes, this could be frustrating yarn, but if you have it, try it. Now this one, when I first knew about Shine, I actually went out and bought this. I put it in the embroidery floss category. It's a very thin, metallic, almost cording. Terrifically hard to punch with. It will not punch on its own, no matter how much you double it up or quadruple it up in a punch needle. But if you add it to another yarn, what we call a carrier yarn, this is a needlepoint yarn, so kind of a coarser wool yarn, it then punched. And it's sort of a neat effect seeing that metallic cording coming up. And again, not in the shiny category, but it depends on the design and what you put together. This is one of my kids' t-shirts that I cut up. And when you cut up a t-shirt and then give it a yank, it coils on itself and you can punch with it. So t-shirt yarn is a great way to recycle. It's, you probably, have all the fibers already in your house for it. And I think it punches quite nicely. There's a little unevenness, but depending on the design, it'll work well. So I wanted to show you all these designs, and I'm so looking forward to seeing what everybody does with this pattern. And when you post on social media, which I hope you do, it's a little bit of a mouthful to remember, but it's hashtag IPNRHD. So International Punch Needle Rug Hooking Day. So we affectionately call it IPNerd. So it is a little hard to remember, but once you post once, Instagram's going to remember, and you'll go to put that in, and it'll come up again. So it'd be so fun to look through Instagram and Facebook and see all the different interpretations of shine and how you make it shine. Are you going to add beads? Are you going to use metallic yarns? How are you going to make it shine? You know, I know there's people who have punched with cut up trash bags and shopping bags, and some shopping bags could be quite shiny. If you are tempted to try the trash bags, though, you need a hefty bag. It needs to be a quite thick trash bag. The thin trash bags don't work very well. So I would like to show you a piece that is sort of my poster child for when you have a beautiful yarn and you just need to make it work. So I did this piece a number of years ago when my son was much younger and still playing with toys, and he asked for leaves to summon a rainbow. So I know that's a strange request, but it's based on Totoro, which is this Japanese anime that he likes. So I came up with this, and I had this amazing yarn that transitioned colors on its own. I mean, it's just such beautiful yarn. It was so hard to punch with. I doubled it, I tripled it. If you look closely, it's lumpy in areas. It was so fine that it didn't have enough weight to kind of go down into the cloth. And so I would have to sort of stroke it with each punch to give it a little bit of weight. So that was a very tricky way to punch. But I wanted to show you this example of, if you really love the yarn and have a vision for a project, try it. You know, the worst you can do is realize that the yarn doesn't work, or you may stumble upon something that really does work. So a lot of us in the fiber arts have, you know, overflowing stash cupboards of different things. You just never know. So just a little bit about this piece. This is a metal coat hanger that I just wrapped rug yarn around. Then I punched, you know, my very, very slippery yarn. But for the black, I switched to a coarser yarn. And then I whipped the edge. I sewed some wool on the back, and I put some wire when I whipped the edge. And so I have this sort of little sculpture toy. But I keep this in my studio now that my son's no longer playing with it. And it just reminds me to experiment, to try new things, and know that not all of them will work, but some of them will work good enough. So there is my poster child for try it, you never know. So that wraps up the portion about our pattern. So again, I want to have everybody post your patterns. You can send them to me directly. I love that. But I'd love to see them posted where everyone can see them on social media. So it's the hashtag IPNRHD. Our official day is the 9th. That's this Saturday. So that would be fun to just sort of flood social media with the shine pattern on that day. And before I switch over to our slideshow about display, I want to just look at these two again, side by side. So, and I recommend trying this. It's fun to see what a pattern will look like in the regular needle with a thicker yarn, and then with the fine needle. It's a very good learning exercise. And then the next time you come up to a pattern, your eye will be more in tune and think, oh, you know, that'll work a lot better with a fine needle. Or, you know, you might like this look, and this might be the look you're going for. And then you know that you can take a pattern that initially you think, oh, all those little lines, they're never going to work. They did. You know, I still like them better over here, but we can make them work. Oh, and I always sort of have to have this little public service announcement, especially because there's a lot of traditional hookers on the call. When we're hooking, we're pulling our fiber towards us, and each loop is pretty much where we want it when we pull it. With punch, since we're punching away from ourselves, that's not the case. And that can really throw people. So with both of these patterns, you know, I was working them on the backside. They're looking beautiful, all my flat stitches. And when I flipped them over, there was a little bit of chaos on this side initially. So your second tool is always your closed scissors. And you go through and you tell, I want that loop here, I want you here. Like these swirls did not look like swirls. You know, I had to kind of tell them where to go. And especially if you look at your work, once you've done the details, but no background, it's going to look even more chaotic. The swirls won't have anything to prop them up. So whenever you do that and you get a little concerned, just remember the neighbors. The neighbors have not moved in yet. All these neighboring loops have to come in and help prop up your details. And then you'll be a lot happier. And then you come in with your scissors and you nudge things where you want to be. I find there's a lot less nudging with the 13 and the 14 because it's a smaller loop. It's less likely to not be where you want it. And we have a lot more nudging the higher we go in size. So like the 8 regular, I'd see even more nudging. And also if you punch it too tightly, they're going to compete for a space and you're going to have a lot more nudging. So here is the shine pattern done with both the regular and, oh, and when you post, it would be fun for you to say what needle you used, because that would be really neat. And I think like I could have done this in the 8 and then the background in the 10. That would have been a neat look too. So combining needles, it would be really interesting to see, did anyone use a fine needle and a regular needle? That would be a lot of fun to see. All right, so now we're going to switch and we're going to go to, I'm going to share my screen and we are going to go to my PowerPoint presentation. So let's see if I can get this to work. All right. So what we're doing here. All right, come on, start up. There we go. All right, display ideas. So the International Punch Needle Day pieces are 8 by 8. And that is sort of an awkward size, not big enough for a pillow. What exactly do we do with all these pieces? And I often will teach 8 by 8 in classes because it's a good size to learn a lot of techniques. And there's a lot of wonderful people on Instagram putting out different patterns, and also an 8 by 8 fits perfectly on the 10 by 10 frames. So we have all these patterns out there, and what are we going to do with them? So now I just want to make sure if someone can pop up in the chat, is this looking okay? Can everyone see this? And you're not seeing all my little Zoom stuff too? Are we seeing does it look okay? I'll just carry on until someone tells me it doesn't look okay. So display ideas. What are we going to do with all these pieces? Baskets. I love baskets. So this is last year's piece. And what we have, hold on, whoops, sorry. Oh, it went backwards. Well, that was last year's piece. And I sewed it on a basket. Or I could have sewn it on a basket. Actually, I love using magnets. So one of the things I do is I will glue or sew magnets on, and then I attach magnets to the basket lid. And so that's how it sat there. So baskets are fun. You can put things on the front or the sides. This basket I found at Target. This is a rope basket. I especially love rope baskets because they you can sew right into them. So you can get these in all different sizes. This little flag piece was originally I had with magnets on a metal piece, and then I decided to sew it onto here. So file boxes. Now, I like having a countertop file box with all the coming and goings of kids. There's a million papers. And so we have this file box, and it was the perfect place. I got it at the Container Store, but you can find them at Office Supply. A perfect place for to mount a small, uniquely shaped punch needle piece. So this piece was done with the fine needle, and it didn't really have a good home, and it looked perfect to go on here. And a quick note on fine versus regular again, if I had punched this pattern in the regular with a regular needle, you wouldn't have been able to see the bunny's whiskers or eyes. It would have all blended together. So this pattern really just had to be done with a fine needle, and I did it with the 13 and the 14. So because I change my mind all the time, and I really love this piece and I didn't want to glue it permanently to the file box, I rolled up pieces of duct tape or Gorilla tape, which has a nice strong adhesive. And so there's just all these little rolls of tape behind it, and it's on there. I think it looks good. Bags. There's so many ways we can combine both our traditional rug hooking and our punch needle onto bags. I particularly like bags with texture, since punch needle has a lot of texture. This bag I found at Target, and I thought it went really well. This is an 8 by 8 piece that's sewn onto it, and it was a nice soft bag, so I was able to sew on. Now this bag has a unique story to it, and I actually have it. I can put it under the screen when we're finished during the Q&A. This was originally a framed piece, and the frame broke. So my friend Gail cut it off. She whipped the edge, and then she attached this clasp and turned it into a little clutch. I mean, I just think it was just so clever, and just a great way to use a piece and make it into something after its frame broke. Now in the bag world, this is a very small bag, and the piece that I put on there was originally a coaster that I had taught a coaster class locally. And I enjoyed it as a coaster, but when I realized it had the exact same color as the lining of this little bag that I had found, I decided to glue it on. I could have sewn that one on too, but sometimes I glue. Now, a word on glue. Glue eats away at wool. So we use glue sparingly, and we don't use glue with our heirloom pieces. Over time, well, now this has folded monk's cloth on either side, so it's not actually touching the wool yarn, but glue will eat it away, and it's very sad when a rug is reduced to little bits. Here is a piece. This was slightly larger. I want to say this is a 10 by 10, and I was testing out a pattern, and this was when my daughter was a lot younger and willing to wear her mother's creations. She wanted me to turn it into a purse, so I created a braid using the Komohimo braiding technique out of rug yarn. I had a piece of wool that I sewed to the back and whipped the edge, and it's just like a sort of little crossbody saddle bag that my daughter enjoyed when she was younger. Now it sits in my studio on top of a sheep because she's almost 18 and doesn't wear her mother's creations anymore. Frames. We can definitely frame our work. You know, we call it rug hooking. It does not have to be a rug. In fact, a lot of the stuff we create are these small fiber art pieces. What I wanted to show you with this piece is I made it specifically to go in the frame, and even with the best measuring, it might not fit. So in general, we always want a straight line on our borders anyways, but whenever you're trying to fit it on something, if you're trying to fit it to a footstool, inside a frame, anything, make sure you have at least a few rows of straight lines. You know, here I'm, swirling in as I'm punching, but here I have straight lines. That allows me to remove a line. I can remove just the top one or just the side one to get it to fit perfectly in a frame. And I've learned that the hard way. So that's why I do that on all pieces now. If I need to fit it in somewhere, even with the best measuring, you might need to add or remove a straight line. So when we're talking about more wall art here, this wooden frame is the same frame I used for our International Punch Needle Day piece. They come unfinished. I found these online, and I'm not sure this company is still in business, but I still have seen them online and seen them on Amazon. But what these are sort of a shadow box frame, but they also are the flip side of a wooden artist board where people will be painting on the other side of it. So, so you just put the piece in, you can fill it totally. You could put some scrapbooking paper behind it, or you could paint it like I did for the International Punch Needle Day piece. So what I did here, and I can show it more in the Q&A at the end. I actually have the piece. I have Velcro on the back side of this and glued to the board. And this allows me to take the piece off for like purposes like today, so I can show it to you not attached to the board. It also allows me to put another piece up there. And then on the back of the board, I have command strips. I love command strips because that allows you to not have a million holes in your wall. And if the piece is light enough, you can attach it with command strips and then take it down and change your mind. So wall art, more wall art. Now, as I said before, I love magnets. There's all kinds of wonderful little metal frames at craft stores and stores like Hobby Lobby. And I even been known to carry a little magnet in my purse so that I can test to see if the metal frame is magnetic, because I like to glue magnets to the back of my pieces and then display them on these frames. And what's neat is you can then switch them out. So like the one with the circles over here, I have all sorts of seasonal ones that I can put in there. My niece designed a piece for me and I can put that in, but then I can change it and put a pumpkin or some hearts, or it's fun to change it up. So that, and these are quite small pieces. Like this piece right here is maybe only 3 inches by 6 inches. It's a good way to use up scrap yarn, create a little piece of fiber art. So I love metal frames. This frame I found recently at Hobby Lobby, and it had a cord so you could hang it. I think ultimately I would spray paint this. I don't really like the metal. I think it's a little too shiny. So you could always spray paint metal and it will still hold a magnet. Now with this, if you could see over here, if you see my cursor, I sewed the magnet on, which is time consuming. It's easier to glue. But the reason I sewed it on is this piece is actually going to be in a show and it won't need magnets. So I'll just cut the magnets off when it goes to the show. But again, with magnets, I can take this down. I can put up another piece. I can change my mind. So love using magnets. So some more wall art. And now another fun thing, this is how I do all my kits. And anyone can do this at home, especially if you have a gripper frame. Take a picture frame, take off the back, sand it. It's best if the frame has a little beef to it. And then stretch your mux cloth and glue the frame down. I weight it with books and I glue it a million times over. So I use school glue and then I use hot glue. But what's great is you now have a piece of mux cloth that you can punch into and you have a little fiber art piece just ready to go. So this is 5 by 7, not very big at all. But it's a fun way to practice a new technique. You know, here I was doing some sculpting, a small project, a gift. These can be hung on the wall using command strips again, or a nail. You can also get a little easel from the craft store and prop it up on a counter or a desk, and you can have a little fiber art piece. Another small piece, I think this is one that's a lot of fun. So based on the same concept, Midnight Creative, you can find her online, Katie, she's wonderful. These were unfinished wooden house frames with musk cloth in them. And I thought they looked like birdhouses. So I had a lot of fun with this. And this kind of circles back a little bit to what we were talking about before, finding the right tool for the task. This project actually has punch needle. I use my rug hook. I have standing wool in here. I hooked the birds with yarn. I did not punch them because of the standing wool right here. I wanted to be able to see what I was doing. And then these are needle felted balls. So this was a lot of fun. And this, I'm still figuring out exactly how this is going to attach to the wall. I played around with some command hooks, but I want to kind of have this guy be a little farther forward. But again, this is just to emphasize that rug hooking is not necessarily rugs. We can have quite small pieces and have a lot of fun with them and use all kinds of techniques. So I just wanted to show you this because I just thought this was a lot of fun. Now, changing your mind. I changed my mind so much. I changed my mind a lot with color. I'm always pulling stuff out of my work and trying new colors. And then I'll change my mind with a finished piece. So this piece, if you've been doing International Punch Needle with us for a few years, this was, I believe if I'm right, it was 2019's piece. So I was not the ambassador. The ambassadorship is a 2-year position. So this was before my time. This was designed by Christy, another Oxford instructor, this wonderful little bee. So I punched this, had a great time with it. I added, to make it a little bit bigger than an 8x8, I added a touch of a border to it. And then I turned it into a small pillow, and it lived as a small pillow until this year. And because I knew I wanted to share with you all lots of different ways we could use small pieces, I've had my eye out for different pieces. And I found this wonderful wall shelf at the store. Now, this shelf hook thing, it had an indent in it. It has so it had a rooster, and it said like Cafe Paris or something. And when I got home, I realized, you know, my first thought was, oh, I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna create a piece and put it in the indentation. But then I looked over on my shelf, because by that point the pillow was so small it just didn't really work on a couch. So it was on a shelf, and I saw the pillow and realized it was the exact right colors for this black hook wall shelf, but it didn't fit perfectly. And that, I think, is wonderful when things don't fit perfectly. So what I did was I set it in there and I moved it around a bit, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I love quillies, which is, you know, when you're coiling strips of wool fabric. And I had the perfect leftover wool from another project, and I created all these quillies. I glued them. I don't usually glue my quillies. I usually sew them because, again, glue and wool, but there was no way I was going to sew all these. And it works well for what it is. So I glued all my quillies in. And then because the piece is up at the top, I added more quillies to kind of balance the fact that they're, you know, I have these quillies at the bottom. So this, and it's not just because this is my newest piece in my studio, but this I think is going to go down as my favorite piece, because I took a charming piece I had before that just often kind of floated around because 8x8 is too small for a decent sized pillow. And I've turned it into something that just makes me smile every time I look at it. So I would like to encourage you, even if you've created something, like it was a little weird to cut the back off my pillow that I know, you know, I'd spent some good time sewing that together, but I just really love how it turned out. So don't be shy to take a piece that's maybe sat around for years and find a new way to display it. It can be on the wall. It can, you know, sew it to a bag. There's so many different options with displaying our pieces. And that'd be fun too. You know, when you post online, is to share what are you going to do with your finished International Punch Needle Rug Hooking Day piece? You can, are you going to make it into a larger pillow? Is it going to become wall art? You know, what's the plan? So I'm going to end this with our two pieces from last year. We have Hope and this year's Shine. And I've just so enjoyed being the ambassador for these last 2 years. And that those little birdhouses from Midnight Creative, Katie, she is going to be your next International Punch Needle Day ambassador. For 23 and 24, she will be bringing you the new patterns from the theme that Amy decides. And then hopefully there'll be more webinars in the future. And make sure you look up Katie. She's a wonderful artist and teacher. And I know she will lead the International Punch Needle Day campaign well. So what we have up next with our webinar is we have a few more announcements from Deb, and then we are going to go into a Q&A.
Thanks, Rebecca. I learned a lot today, especially about the different foundations that you recommend using. I didn't know there were that many choices and what the differences were. So thanks for that a lot. We do have some questions coming in from the audience for Rebecca. We'll get to those in just a minute. In the meantime, let me tell you about a few special offers. We do have 2 books that you might be interested in. Tattered and Timeless by the ladies at the Old Tattered Flag, Julie Thomas and her mom, have projects and instructions for both rug hooking and mini punch needle. And the second book is Mastering the Art of Punch Needle Rug Hooking from Canadian punch needle artist and teacher Simone Voivodin. It's a comprehensive how-to for rug punching, and it is going to become a classic. You need to have that for your bookshelf. We have a special offer on these 2 books for our participants today. Go to the Rug Hooking website to order and use the promo codes you see on the screen. We also have a special offer for new subscribers today, a subscription to Rug Hooking Magazine for $19.95 for 5 issues of incredible inspiration. Subscribe on our website, www.rughookingmagazine.com/punchday. I hope you join our rug hooking family. And last but not least, if you are not already a book club member, visit our website and sign up. You'll see the link on the screen, and we'll send it to you after the webinar is over. This is the best way to learn about the newest books from RHM and to get special deals as well. We'd love to have you in the club. And remember our special giveaway. Be sure to post a photo of your punch needle project on our Facebook page or in our punch party event. Use the hashtag on the screen to enter for a chance to win. Also, Amy Oxford of the Oxford Company has more news. Rebecca mentioned this already. The Oxford Company is having a 20% off sale on Saturday, April 9th. Visit the website at www.amyoxford.com on Saturday to save on supplies as you get started or continue your punching explorations. Check out her punch needles and, as Rebecca mentioned, her great frames. So now we're ready for the questions for Rebecca. Rebecca, are you ready?
Yes.
How do we choose the right yarn for the needle and for the material we are punching into? Can we buy inexpensive yarns to practice with?
Yes, so that's a great question. And can we do a double screen in case we need to use the hand screen? Perfect. Okay, so back to the yarns. The coarser the yarn, the better. So look for needlepoint yarns, tapestry yarns. You can find them often at garage sales online, or and then when you're in the store, I would steer away from your really soft acrylics. They're beautiful, they're colorful, but they don't punch as well. So so let's repeat the question one more time to make sure I'm answering it fully.
How do you choose the best yarns and the best fabric to punch into?
Okay, so yeah, so you know, the gold standard would be the rug yarn, and the reason for that is the coarseness of the yarn. It really just holds up so well with our loops, and if it's going to be an actual rug, it can hold up to then you walking on it, footstools, all of that. So wool is just a really nice fiber. It sometimes, I think, it can be viewed as sort of being snobby, or I only use wool, but it is more the nature of wool and the scales on the wool and how it will sort of knit itself together that makes wool just so excellent for this craft of both punch needle and traditional rug hooking. So that's why you hear people talking about wool all the time, but by no means do you only have to use wool. Like the jersey knit, that you can buy that as a yarn, or cutting up your own works really well. And then the main thing to think about with the yarn versus the needle is look at the thickness of your needle. You want a thicker yarn in your regular needle. You want your thinner yarn in your fine needles. And then back to the foundation cloths, again, it would be your monk's cloth, which is what's designed for the craft. But then feel free to experiment and play around. Like I am having fun with these old coffee bags. You know, if it has holes in it, try to punch in it. I use window screen when I punch, when I'm teaching, so people can see both my hands with traditional rug hooking. I mean, I'm known to walk through the fabric store and look at the weave of fabrics and think, ooh, can I punch into that? So try it. But punch needle, traditionally, we are using monk's cloth.
The other part of the question was, can you use inexpensive yarns to practice with? Does that help?
You can. And I did see, because I can see the chat a little bit, I saw a question come through where someone was talking about how their loops are uneven and was asking about that. And that goes back a little bit to the yarn you're using. So our inexpensive, softer yarns, you can definitely punch with them and practice with them, but they can struggle with you're not getting quite as even a loop with them. And again, because they're just not as coarse. And I was just working with a student of mine. She had the absolute perfect color in a yarn she already owned. And we tried every way we could think of to make that yarn work, but it was just too slippery. And it wouldn't catch, like with gravity and weight. We just could not create a loop with it. So there are times where a yarn just simply will not work. So don't give up on this craft. If the yarn you're using is giving you trouble, it could be the yarn. The other thing is making sure that your foundation cloth is really nice and tight. If it's bouncing and if it's too loose, you're going to get uneven loops, and you might feel that you're not doing it right, but it is really just the fact that your cloth needs to be tighter.
What two hooks would you recommend for a beginner?
Okay, that's a great question. So a part of it is preference. So I love the number 10. The number 10 is the 1/4 inch loops. Let's look at the 10. But also you have to ask yourself, what are you going to be doing? So I work with a lot of knitters, and knitters, have enormous stash of usually thinner yarns. So if you're a knitter and your house is just overflowing with thin yarn, then I'd say the 10 fine would be a great place to start, because it'll hold your thinner yarns. I love the 1/4 inch loop. It's a very nice height of a loop. But you could always do your 10 regular and just double up your knitting yarns. But again, some of the really soft yarns don't punch as well. Now, the reason I like the 10, as my husband teases me about being a little pathologically thrifty, this of our larger needles is our smallest loop. So we've got our 1/4 inch loop. So I'm using less of my yarn. So I like to use this. So I like using the 10. So a 10 is a great starter point. Now, if you have some fine motor issues or are teaching children, the 8 is a great one to start with, because that's our tallest loop. So creating that 1/2 inch loop, you have more play as you come up. So it can often be good for someone who has a slightly shakier hand, a young child, or if you really want luscious, really thick rugs under your feet, go with your 8 because that's your highest loop. Now, if you think you're mainly going to be doing detailed small fiber art pieces, that's where I love the needles I used in the Shine piece, the mini and the mini with heels. So my first needle that I would say for most people, 10 regular. It's a versatile needle. You can double up your thinner yarns in it. And then the second needle, but this one really does come down to preference because I just love those little baby loops and I love all the detail. Like if I was going to create a Christmas stocking, which my children still don't have, it's the, the cobbler's children have no shoes. They have no punch needle Christmas stockings because I haven't done them yet. But I would use these smaller needles because they almost look like needle point, especially the 14, the smallest. But I like the 13 quite a bit because it's just a bit taller. So I get slightly more even loops because of the fine motors a little bit less with coming up and down. So I'm gonna say the 13 and the 10. So the 10 regular and the 13 would be my 2 needles to go to. And then often the next question, especially if you have the number 10, your next needle, if say you aren't at all interested in doing the small stuff, your next one will be the 8 because there's just enough height difference between these two that you can really see it in a piece. And I love combining these 2 needles together. Or when I combine the 9 and the 8 or the 10 and the 9, I just don't see the difference like I do with these 2. So often the 8 will be the 3rd needle someone gets.
Good advice. Can you address this a little bit already? Can you use any fiber content of yarn for a punch needle? Wool, alpaca, all the various.
The main thing to consider is your final finish of it and how much heat you can apply to it. So, I'll pull this guy out and we can look at it again. Oh, I wanted to show it to you this way too. So here's the piece on the board. So when I was playing around with how I was going to do my piece, I had a really fun, shiny yellow yarn that I got that was almost like plasticky kind of yarn. And if I had done that, what I would have done was punched everything with the wool, steamed it, then punched with the yarn that couldn't handle the heat. So you can mix yarns, just know that you won't necessarily be able to apply a lot of heat to it at the end if you choose something that will melt. So yeah, experiment and have fun. And even like take a piece of monk's cloth and create a sampler board for yourself. And you'll learn which yarns you like to punch with and which that you would rather not or save for a special project. And then it opens up a wide variety of projects when you can use materials you have in the house or stuff you find when you're out and about.
You talked about being careful using glue. We have 2 questions here that are somewhat related. How about Mod Podge or silicone? Or do they react with wool in a bad way?
Yes. So now Mod Podge I can't speak to because I don't know exactly what's in that, but I do repair rugs. I don't do it as much as I used to, but when you think of a commercial rug and you flip it over and it has sort of an adhesive layer on the back, that would probably be sort of a silicone based something. Or when, punch rugs used to be punched exclusively in this country. And now, especially like if you're going to find one from like LL Bean or a catalog, those punch rugs are being punched in India and they have a much shorter loop and they all have an adhesive on the back. And that's because it's such a short loop. A cat, a dog could grab one of those loops and really pull it very easily. Now, so I repaired a rug that it was less than 10 years old. And that backing, whatever that was it a silicone? Whatever that commercial backing was, had reduced. You could see all the loops, but if you pulled them, they were just little tiny pieces of yarn now. It had completely eaten away the back of the running loop stitch. So it's tough because we see things online, and I know people who use tufting guns will often put stuff on the back of their work, and ultimately over time it will destroy the wool. Now, but you know, we all make choices. Like I use glue on things. And so, you know, my great grandchildren might not be able to enjoy that bee. Well, as long as nobody touches it, it should be fine. But I think that the problem with glue on rugs that are being walked on is that they're moving. So then they'll break apart. But our pieces that are on the wall, the wool could slowly be being eaten away at, and it probably would be fine.
Can you give some quick instructions for punching with wool strips? What size cut and needle size do you use?
Yes, that is a great question. So I primarily hook with wool strips and punch with yarn. But I do hook with yarn and I do occasionally punch with wool strips. So I do find though that each tool, I find yarn flows through the needle a lot better than a wool strip will. But again, we like to experiment and do different things. So I tend to hook low. So if you are a purist and you hook, you know, as high as the width of your strip, you'll need to look at each punch needle and decide. So like if you hook really high, you'll want to be using the number 8 needle because that's a 1/2 inch height. I tend to hook low. So I usually grab my number 10, which is a 1/4 inch in height. So I'll thread my wool strip in and then I punch just like I punch with yarn. My go-to cuts are between a 5 and a 7. I find the 8 gums up a little bit, and know that we're talking about 2 totally different numbering systems. So don't say to yourself, oh, I love hooking with an 8 cut. I better get an 8 Oxford needle. They are not related. The cut size is how thick your wool is, the wool strip is, and the number on the Oxford needle is how high that needle is. So you'd want an 8 only if you want a 1/2 inch loop when you're finished. So I don't like using 8 cuts in the needle. I think they're a little thick. So again, 5 and 7, 5, 6, and 7 are what I hook with. And then you just thread it in like you would yarn. The last 3 inches, for some reason, kind of gum up in the needle. So just, you're not doing anything wrong. That's just the way it happens. So that can be a little frustrating. You might feel like you're wasting a little bit of your wool there, but I definitely have punched with wool before, especially on a background, and I want to keep it all in wool strips. I can go a lot faster with a punch. Just know that gumming up, you're not doing anything wrong. It's just as that fiber gets short in the needle, inside the channel of the needle, it just kind of wants to grab a little bit, and then you just cut it off.
Here's a related question. How do you know the size of the needle? My Oxford needle does not say the size on it. I know I have, and I have one that I don't know what size it is.
That is a great question because it is kind of hidden. So let's see if we can pull it up on the camera. Let me move this out of the way. The needle is stamped right here. Do you see that 8? So it's on the top. And depending on the grain of the wood, it can be harder to see. So you can see the 8 right there. Let's see if we can see the 9. And there is no 6. So if you're ever wondering, it's not a 6 there because we don't have a 6. And then we can see the 10 right there. The other way would be to measure right here. So the act of punching, we are folding that yarn in half. So this will come down to a 1/4 inch. So actually, that does look longer than 1/2 inch, doesn't it? So yes, it's here. It's at the top. That's how you'll know.
Okay. We're running long on time, so we have 2 more questions. 1, can you remind me where I can get the shine pattern?
Yes. Okay. So I think it's listed on a couple different places, like it should be on Rug Hooking Magazine. It also is on storytellerwool.com. You can, as soon as you go onto the website, actually there's 2 patterns that can be downloaded right now for free. I created a sunflower pattern recently, a coaster pattern for people who were interested in doing sunflowers for Ukraine. And then right below that is the International Punch Needle Day pattern. So you'll see the shine pattern on the Storyteller Wool website, and you click on it and it'll have very complete directions as well as the pattern. And then also my contact information is on the pattern if you ever had any questions that you wanted to email me or ask me. And then I believe it's somewhere on Amy Oxford's website as well as the Rug Hooking.
Right. It's also in the Rug Cooking Magazine March, April, May issue.
That's true.
Instructions, you need to go to Rebecca's site to get those. So the last question here, Rebecca, tell us your favorite part about acting as the ambassador for Punch Needle. What did you like best about this role for the past 2 years?
That's a great question. So I think being given a word like hope or shine and then coming up with a pattern for it really pushed me creatively, because now I'll have to say the hope one came to me pretty quickly because I had the Amy wanted it to be a flower, and I don't know, that just clicked. But the journey for me to come up with a shine pattern, it was just neat. It pushed me to think in ways I hadn't thought before. And so creatively, I've really enjoyed these last 2 years, and getting a chance to teach online like this is really neat. One of the things I'm most passionate about, and there's an article, I think 2 issues ago about this in Rug Hooking Magazine, is that rug hooking as a craft, both punch needle and traditional, it's not like quilting. It's not like something you just see sort of everywhere you go. And I'm just very, very passionate that this craft gets passed on to the next generation. So getting the opportunity to teach and to teach, I know we've got people from all over the world on this call, and to also, just to know that my pattern is actually being made by people all over the world helps me feel that I am being authentic in my mission of making sure that this craft, either with the punch or the hook or both combined, gets passed on to the next group of fiber artists out there.
We've done a great job as ambassador, and we want to thank you very much for all you've done for Punch Needle. So, and thank you very much for helping us celebrate today. It's been a pleasure.
All right, well, thank you.
A few notes before we end today. You'll get a follow-up email with a link to this event so that you can view it again as you continue punching. Rebecca gave us a lot of information today, and it'll be nice to be able to revisit her demonstration as you do your work. The link will also include the links you need for our special offers. We look forward to having you as a subscriber and a book club member. So once again, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Rebecca. Happy punching, everyone. See you soon.